I recently built this platform for a bed. The goal is to have it fold up against the wall so it doesn't take up any space in my studio. First, I have to shorten it by a couple inches so it doesn't hit the spot where the wall juts out. That was a minor oversight in my original dimensions, but not a big deal to fix. It's definitely a compact setup, but it's worth it in my mind to have extra usable square footage in my small room. This bed frame is just a simple 2x4 frame with a 1/2-inch piece of plywood on top, so it's quite easy to make alterations to if I need to make it smaller or bigger. For my initial rough draft, I'd set this thing on a couple 8-inch 4x4 feet. The revised structure to make this thing a Murphy bed folding up against the wall will involve a second frame that stays on the floor, which the top frame is hinged to. I'm not making the bed very wide so that when it's up against the wall, there's still space for standing desks over top it, maximizing as much functional space as possible. I'll be using 3 heavy-duty door hinges I found at an antique store for $3 each. Should handle the weight just fine. Depending on how this works out, I may need to add some assistance springs or a latch system to keep the bed held up while it's stowed away, but I'm hoping it just works without any of that. I do have a little wiggle room to make the bed frame wider before hitting this height of standing desk. So I started to mark out a list of cuts for a 6-inch extension as well as a whole secondary subframe that this thing will hinge to. Now, as always, this is a rough list, highly dependent on what wood I actually have laying around. This will be a 100% scrap build. Luckily, I'd just come across a new haul of 2x4s. These are some extra structures from a short film set me and my buddies made a few years ago. I stopped by a friend's house when I was back in my hometown to get these out of their way. No piece is longer than 4 feet or so, which is unfortunate, but it's a lot of good wood. Maybe some of it's a bit warped. I'll find a way to use it though. I was unaware at the time that this would be the last scrap wood haul my car would ever pick up, on the current engine at least. So unfortunately my lumber reserves might be a bit dry after the next couple projects, but I'll worry about that when I get there. I'm gonna need to get creative on this project, making longer planks out of shorter ones. I have an abundance of 2 to 3 foot 2x4s, but nothing really over 4 or 5 feet. The total length of this structure is about 7 feet. I could just go and buy more 2x4s, but I'm gonna experiment with splicing them together to get through some of my reserves of shorter wood. I did end up finding one longer 2x4 on this broken fence though. The fence wood was very dirty and full of a lot of rusty old nails. Probably not worth using, but for whatever reason I have a compulsion to make use of everything I have available before buying a $3 new 2x4. I put my recently fixed up plane to work from the other day's video. Don't know why I thought planing indoors would be a good idea. Speaking of things you shouldn't do indoors, I then started to stain my 2x4s. In the spirit of Halloween, I had this spooky red wood stain laying around I decided to use. My preference is usually just a classic dark stain, but I've got so many random tins I figured I'd just start trying them all. This one went on quite lovely. If you are gonna stain indoors, this stuff can be really nasty. I wore a respirator, opened 3 windows, and had a fan exhausting out. Don't mess around with fumes, folks. In my last few projects, I've been experimenting with using a cheap paint roller to apply stain. Brushes are better at getting in little cracks and screw holes, but for a quick all-over application, the roller's been very efficient. Before long, I had my whole set of 2x4s ready to assemble, assuming my rough planning actually works out. First, I'm gonna extend the main bed frame's width. This just involves taking apart the frame, removing the side pieces, and replacing them with their slightly longer counterparts. The mismatched stain objectively doesn't look very good, but I like it. I usually stick with one wood stain color for all my builds until I run out, so you can visually see the age of something in my studio based on what color I used. It may be ugly, but I think it's kinda cool. To splice together a 7-foot board, I just used 3 shorter ones. No complicated joinery, just a handful of screws thrown in it. I had kind of avoided this process thinking it was messy for all my previous projects, and it kind of is, but it works better than I thought. And I didn't even have to use wood glue to get it to feel plenty sturdy, so I can always disassemble these spliced pieces, replace them with full-length 2x4s later. This one I screwed up the measurements a little bit, had to take 2 inches off that center piece. Ended up working lovely though. It is kind of funny, if you splice together 2 sets of 2x4s, you do not get a 4x4. This is actually 3.5 inches by 3 inches. That was unintentional, but actually works to my favor to offset the thickness of the hinges for the final structure. If it was actually a 4x4, I would have had to chisel out slots for the hinges to make sure everything ends up flush. Now, for this base structure, I'm going to frame it up like normal, but take out that front piece after I've added these 45-degree braces. I put it in to make sure everything's square and then take it out afterwards. I'm going with this C-shaped structure instead of a rectangle so that there's not a 2x4 across my floor at all times when the bed is folded up. With that in place, it's time to add the actual bed and mount the hinges so I can see if this thing actually works. Honestly, with how improvised this whole structure was, I thought it wasn't gonna work that well. And obviously things do get messy, making decisions along the way and using scrap wood that I have to splice together instead of buying new stuff. But this thing has come together remarkably well for how many times I've changed measurements along the way and how many warped boards I've used. And you know, for something like a bed, I'm very happy to have it wrong the first time and make corrections later rather than sleeping on a bed that is the wrong size forever. And it wouldn't be that expensive to build a new one to these exact dimensions later too. I'm using a memory foam mattress topper as padding. It's low profile, easy to transport, and a firm mattress feels better for my back anyway. Now over where this bed folds up against the wall, there's going to be another standing desk. It won't fully cover the bed, just 18 inches from the wall or so, and that will make space for some new tools, including a 3D printer. Now, this other part of the standing desk is actually already done. I filmed these 2 videos back to back, so this video will be out tomorrow. The bed looks really small on that lens, but it's actually a twin XL size if you count the space back here after it's folded out. You could do a very similar design that looks a bit cleaner by adding pieces around the edge to have it like actually framed up. I don't do that because I'm like stupid tall, and so I end up hanging off the end of whatever bed I sleep in. It's a 7-foot bed and I'm 6'8", so I opted to leave any boards off the end. One day I'll make a very beautiful and functional giant 8-foot California King bed, but for now, as I'm sleeping in this studio, this is what I got. It's very comfortable for me. You might look at me like I'm weird. And I am weird. I'm a weird guy. I live a weird life. You know, sleeping on a piece of plywood underneath a 3D printer and a embroidery machine is not the most normal thing in the world, but it works for me. I've been doing this since I graduated high school in my college dorm. I took apart the bunk beds and made them into a standing desk and slept on the floor. So believe it or not, this setup's actually an upgrade for me. I thought I was gonna need some sort of strap system to keep everything in place when I flip it up, but actually that hasn't been an issue yet. You know, I can always make changes later, but for now it does work. So yeah, that's my weird bed setup. I just had to knock that out so I could finalize this second standing desk and get the 3D printer and the embroidery machine up there. Also, I'll elaborate more on the car situation soon. Engine swap / chassis swap may be coming sooner than expected. I'll see you tomorrow, and thank you for your time.